Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the afternoon committee meetings for May 22nd. Earlier this morning, the Planning Committee met to discuss rental issues. Our first committee this afternoon is Public Works, and that committee is chaired by Councilor Terry Borneman.
Thank you, Michael. Joining me on the committee is Jean Knutson and Roxanne Murphy. We have one item before the committee today. It's a resolution for emergency repairs at Post Point.
Good afternoon. Ted Carlson, Public Works Department. We did mention at your last council meeting on May 8th that we would be coming forward with this item, and as Councilmember Borneman mentioned, it is a resolution for emergency repairs at Post Point related to the May 6th failure of the 30-inch pipe in the pipe gallery down at Post Point. And perhaps after the resolution or before we have some information, it wasn't on the calendar today, but to provide a brief update on where we're at in the process of getting the interim fix in place and moving forward with the permanent fix. The resolution in the packet today would cover both of those, both the emergency interim fix that we have been working on since the event, as well as moving forward with the permanent fix. And the reason for that is while the interim fix is in place or will be fully in place at the end of this week, we do have secondary up and running, and Eric has some information on that a little bit later on where we're at with water quality and our permit. But the permanent fix is going to take 4 to 6 months to get in place, and that has to do with both the size of the project as well as the materials required. Some large 30-inch pipe with some specialty fittings to work in the gallery, pipe gallery. That pipe needs to be manufactured. It's not something that we can simply order and have delivered. So the lead time is quite long. And we need to have the permanent fix in place before the rainy season in the fall when we start experiencing higher flows down at Post Point. The interim fix in place, which we'll see some pictures of, essentially we replaced the 30-inch RAS pipe with 4 12-inch pipes that have been run across the surface down at Post Point. And that certainly is adequate to accommodate summer flows, but as we get into the fall, we get the inflow and infiltration into the plant, flows get much, much higher, and that fix would not be adequate for those flows. So we need to move forward with the contract, which does not allow us to go through our typical bidding process, and that's what the resolution is for. It allows us to move forward, negotiate a contract with a contractor, with an engineering firm, without going through our typical competitive bidding process, which can take several weeks for the engineering firm and a couple weeks to get the contract, and then the same thing with the contractor, which would probably put us pretty close to 4 months before we had a contractor in place. So if there's any questions about the resolution and the need to move forward with that, I'd be happy to answer that.
Any questions? I have one question. It's not on the resolution, just on the process. Have you figured out what caused the material fail?
Sure. Not yet. We don't have all the answers at this point. We have hired an outside engineering firm to help us do a bit of forensic engineering on this to figure out why the materials failed. We had, as mentioned, the 30-inch pipe that was suspended from the pipe gallery with hangers embedded into the concrete ceiling. Mm-hmm. Not something that you could look inside the concrete ceiling and see what was occurring inside. So we need to take a look and see what led to the failure. We'll be looking at that with the engineering firm. I will say, as part of the new design of the permanent fix, we're going with a different support structure. We're going to be supporting the pipe from underneath rather than hanging it from the pipe gallery ceiling. But we'll know more as we move forward and evaluate, answer a couple questions related to how it was constructed as it relates to the original engineering design. I will remind the council that that pipe was not part of the 2012 upgrades. So the pipe was installed back in 1992 to 95 when we went to secondary. Certainly, a 25-year-old pipe still well within its expected life cycle. So we didn't suspect that. There's about 24 hangers throughout that didn't show any sign of corrosion at where they are embedded, or we believe embedded into the concrete. We need to look at that a little more. So as we get more information, we'll come forward with council as our outside consultant looks at that and works with staff and get more information. We'll certainly let you know.
I just move that we pass the resolution for emergency repairs at Post Point.
Comments, questions? Anybody?
Yeah. So I was interested in the scope of this work, that you've hired an independent person to come in and kind of take a look. Since a lot of the other pipes are hanging from the ceiling as well, is the scope of what you can do here also going to be if you need to change that full line and support it from underneath? And I was also wondering if, since this, I mean, we're hoping it's an isolated incident, but the second fold of that, would it also include like a full facility condition assessment so that we know where we are and where we need to be?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, so any of the pipe that's hanging with that type of structure, most of the pipe in the gallery, and Eric can elaborate on this a bit, is supported from underneath, more of on a rack configuration, whereas this pipe was supported by what they call a trapeze hanger, because it looks like a trapeze coming down that the pipe rests in like a saddle on. All of that hanging 30-inch pipe will be brought down as part of this process. So we've removed all that was remaining elevated. We've already taken that down, gotten that off the ceiling from a safety perspective, and then the new design will support it from underneath. As it relates to the rest of the piping and the equipment in the pipe gallery, in 2012, when we did the upgrade to secondary, which this pipe is part of the secondary treatment process, and Eric can show some pictures related to that, we did a condition assessment of all of the piping and pumps and other systems in the pipe gallery, much of which was replaced as part of our 2012 upgrade. The RAS pipe was never identified as a pipe of concern. Throughout the condition assessment, it showed that it was in good condition. We now know that there was perhaps corrosion up in the ceiling or something of that effect, and that's what we'll find out more through this outside consultant. But we believe all the other issues related to safety in the pipe gallery, or could be related to safety from hanging pipes, have been addressed. This 30-inch pipe will be addressed through this fix. And Eric, do you want to elaborate on any of that? Or?
No, I think you've covered it pretty well, Ted. One of the things that we do need to go through is figure out why this pipe connection fell off of the ceiling. There's really is no indication. There was no indication that there was the potential for this catastrophic of a problem, but there's no indication that there's a reason to be concerned about other pipes in the facility. This is the largest pipe that's hung this way. Almost all the other smaller diameter pipes are much smaller, but they're also supported in a different fashion. But it's really critical that we know what happened so we don't repeat that mistake in the future. But that comes at a later time. Right? We are focused on other priorities right now, and so that will come weeks, if not months, down the road.
So I understand that, but I still have to vote on this later this evening. So as far as this is a safety concern, I want to understand if this is part of the scope of the project that you'll be moving into, is that we saw that the employee had to go wade through what he had to wade through in order to just turn this off. So will you be looking at making redundant systems so that people won't have to, if that situation happens, and then also if employees would have been there now thinking forward of how would that have been handled? Is that within the scope of this as well?
Yeah, that's going to be a different analysis, which it actually has already begun. The outside engineering consultant that's looking at the 30-inch RAS pipe and doing some forensics on how that was hung will not be part of that operational scope. But we have debriefed on the event itself because, as Councilmember Barker mentioned, I mean, it was an emergency situation. There were safety concerns for employees that were in the pipe gallery at that time. We had a debrief last Thursday with our safety officer, plant staff, some of the engineers associated with the plant, and went through that response. And there's certainly some lessons learned. I mean, when we have an emergency response, that's what we do. We need to debrief, kind of identify the lessons learned, and then act accordingly. So I think that's really valuable and important to do. We've identified some things as it relates to training. We do train our folks on confined space and hazardous materials and protective equipment, but we need to continue to train on that and maybe look at where we locate some of that equipment throughout the plant so that if someone has to respond in an emergency situation, maybe there's more locations for that equipment. You know, one of the things we also know is during an emergency event, you go through training, we have protocols, but people respond and you know, they want to do the right thing. They want to save the plant, and you have to kind of debrief and take a step back and say, you know, you act one way through an emergency. Could we have done it differently, and kind of ingrain that safety into our staff. So it's a very good point. It's something that we need to continue to do. We've started that process internally, and our safety officer, who's a public works employee, he's not down at plant specifically, but he leads our training. He's leading that effort, and if we need to, as we go through, identify some outside folks to help us with that, we'll certainly do that as well.
Thank you.
Yep.
We have a motion before us. All those in favor of the motion, answer aye. Okay, we'll recommend approval tonight. Eric, you have it.
Yes, thank you. Just a few quick bullet points to go through tonight or this afternoon. Our top 3 priorities continue to be to restore the secondary treatment process. That was largely will be completed by May 26th with the full installation of all the bypass infrastructure. That's a bunch of temporary piping that's on board. The second priority was to preserve the healthy biomass in the secondary system, and we were able to do that starting on May 12th. And I can show you some figures and some graphs as to why that's in place. The next step is to restore that 30-inch pipe, and as part of what we just discussed, part of that is the forensic engineering to figure out what caused the problem, but it's the design, procurement, installation of the new pipe to go in. And as Ted mentioned, that's going to take a couple of months to get underway. The contractor who we are going to use for that work is Diamond B Constructors. They are located in Bellingham. They are on site today, starting the process to remove that pipe. So just a couple of quick slide pictures of the secondary, the RAS bypass. You can see on the ground there a couple of big pipes being installed, two aluminum pipes and 2 plastic pipes being put in place. Whoops. So each one of those pipes is connected to an existing pump in the plant. But even the combined capacity of all 4 of those pipes is not sufficient to move as much water as the 30-inch pipe is designed to handle. A 30-inch pipe size is about 1.5 times this capacity of a 12-inch pipe. Remember the R-squared thing from math. It's a lot bigger pipe than 4 12-inch pipes, which is important because when we get to October, we need that full capacity of that 30-inch pipe. So just in terms of water quality, and this is the restoration of the secondary treatment process. You can see on this graph, this is the total suspended solids. This is how much stuff is in the water. On May 6th is when the rupture occurred. You saw that increase over time till about May 12th when the secondary bypass was first operational, and then almost immediately we see the drop back to a standard water quality limit. What we see on this chart is that we are still below the permit limits that are required by the operating permit when it comes to TSS, or total suspended solids. Likewise, in terms of fecal coliform bacteria, this is the risk to human health. At no time did we exceed the permit limit. We had one day that was shortly after the rupture where the spikes went up a little bit. We were able to adjust the primary process and control that. So very quickly we were maintaining the safety, if you will, of the effluent coming out of the plant. This is a measure of turbidity. This is how clear the water is leaving the facility. Again, you see that spike going up when the primary system was only functioning. As soon as secondary was turned on the 12th, that immediately dropped back down to a high clarity of water. The issue that was of real concern as it comes to the biological process, and that's the biological oxygen demand, is how much organics are in that water before it's released. And here we see that again on the break on the 6th, that starts to creep up a little bit. It is coming back down. It started to come back down as soon as the secondary treatment process came online. What that tells us is the biology of secondary is functioning and working. We'll continue to see those numbers drop down like the other plots showed and get us down to what those limits are. We did need to notify, and we have notified, or in the process of doing it today, the Department of Ecology that we have exceeded the weekly maximum for BOD. Every indication is that we will be below the monthly limit for BOD. So there's 2 limits, weekly and monthly. We are likely to exceed the weekly, but we'll be below the monthly. All things considered, that's a pretty good thing. To be down for about 5 or 6 days and get secondary back online, and to see that trend to go up and come back down really speaks to the professionalism of our operators in making good, quick, rapid decisions. So just a quick description of what's happening. So the blue squares here are the primary treatment processes, and the key to this is this pump station right here. So all of the flow of the city of Bellingham comes into the treatment plant, goes to the primary treatment process, and then is pumped up from this pump station into the aeration basins and on through the rest of the system. So it goes from the blue, gets pumped up to the green through secondary, goes down through the secondary process. A portion of that flow is routed through this RAS line, this return activated sludge line, that fell to the ground in this area right here. So that is out of service. We still maintain disinfection. We still maintain solids handling. That did not get affected. We are installing the secondary bypass, but this bypass, those 12-inch pipes, is pumping not to aeration basin, but to the primary pump station. So now we're pumping not only the flows coming into the city, but the return flow as well, which means when we get to the very wet weather flows, the pump station, which is designed to handle only the flows of the city, is not going to have the capacity to cover those flows plus the RAS flows. So that shows a typical pattern. This was from last year, and this is the weather window we have. So hence the need for the emergency declaration, which you just move forward, is we have about 5 months between now and the 1st of October before those wet weather flows start to pick up. And that's the target by October.
So yeah, what's going to happen in the wet weather is we'll get what we call inflow and infiltration. And it just strikes me we haven't actually heard for a while. We've been moving forward on a project to retrofit in some parts of our town the pipes so we get less infiltration to worsen these peaks. We haven't heard about the progress on that recently. Now might be a really good time to renew the successes and lessons and maybe expand that if called for.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd be happy to come back. We'll schedule a work session and come back with some information. We've been doing very good, or been doing much better. We haven't had an overflow for many, many years, so that's a good thing. And we'll come back and talk about the projects that we've done and where we're at with I&I.
Sounds like it's time for that.
Yeah.
And while I've got you here, since I've had a few questions, people inquiring about Holly Street, if you could just give us a real quick update about timelines on that, because I know there's a number of people kind of anxious about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I know people are anxious for us to get off Holly Street and stop disrupting traffic and businesses there. Things have been progressing very well with Holly. We're now to the point where we need to go in and grind the existing pavement down along the curbs and then come in with the final pave. We are waiting till Tuesday after Ski to Sea to do that. We don't want to have Ski to Sea even more disrupted, even though there's no events on Holly itself. We don't want to go in and grind and create more uneven pavement for that big weekend. So starting Tuesday after Memorial Day weekend, we'll come in and we'll grind Holly. And we have a target of trying to have all the paving done before the Commercial Street Market, which is June 15th. So we're still on target to start paving that first week of June. So it looks like we have a good weather window and hope for the best, but hopefully we'll be out of there soon.
Great. Thanks, Ted. And the committee.